Hello and welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're taking a look at my '06 Saab 9.3, and today we will be replacing the front struts. To get started on this, let's take a look at the parts that we're going to need, and then we'll take a look at the tools, and then we'll get started with the repair. So as far as the parts go, let's start with why I'm doing this repair. So I was driving around a little over a week ago, and I heard a weird metal clinking sound coming from my driver's side. So I got home, I pulled it into the garage, took off the front wheel, and then with minimal effort, I was able to remove this from the bottom of the coil spring on the front driver's side. As you can see, the lower part of the spring has rusted in a couple of places there and has cracked. I should not be able to just reach in and grab this and remove this. I'm suspicious the passenger side is cracked too. I've heard a few sounds over there and creaks that don't quite sound right. And so this is clearly not right, and it needs to get replaced for the car to be safe and drivable. So as far as parts, I had a few options on how I could go with parts on this. One option would be to buy a bunch of parts separately. Now, I know some of you are going to say I cheated in what I did. So what I did is I went to eSaabParts.com, and they actually were able to sell me a kit that had the springs, because I had to replace the springs. If I'm going to replace the springs, I might as well replace the front struts. In my opinion, it just makes sense to replace the whole assembly, and they actually offer a complete assembly where the bearing and the bump stop at the top already comes pre-assembled, so I don't have to mess with the coil compressors or anything to try to rebuild this assembly. So I was able to buy two of these, and so each of these is specific to the side of the car. There's a left and a right, as these Bielsteins do come with the bracket for the speed sensor and your brake line to be able to clip on to it. That being said, in shipping, one of mine did get bent a little bit on the side, and there's a few scuffs and dings on the side of the assembly. I don't think it's that big of a deal. There's nothing sharp there. If there were something sharp, I'd file it down. That may have happened whenever they were assembling this for me. This was shipped via UPS. It's about a 40-pound package, and the total cost with tax is right around $500. But you also get with it, see the sticker here, additional parts inside. So we've got the entire assembly here. This kit also comes with the sway bar end links, because if we're going to be in there, these end links do connect to the struts here. So we're going to replace those while we're at it. Now, if we look at this, eSaab Parts is also very convenient. They even put the torque spec that you need printed right on the sticker for how to install these. I found that to be very slick. I don't have to get out my workshop manual because I had already printed off all the stuff I needed to do this repair and have all the torque specs written down. Then when I unboxed this, I found the torque spec stickers, and I thought, that's a really nice touch from eSaab Parts. I appreciate that. And then we also have included with this, so we've got the two sway bar links and the hardware for those. See the bolts there at the bottom. We also have, here are the top strut bolts, even so named, with the torque spec for these as well. And a full set of these. There should be 6. Indeed, there are 6 of those. We also have a set of 2 clips. These go on the side over here to be able to, over here on the side to be able to secure our brake lines into the clip on the side of the struts, so you get new sets of clips. And we also have the mounting screws. These go in the lower part here. There's 2 on each side, so a total of 4, as well as the bolts. And these also provide, again, on the bag, very well packaged, 59 foot-pounds plus 135 degrees of angle after you get the 59 foot-pounds. So that's turn at 90, and then an additional 45 gets you to that 135 degrees. And these bolts are kind of weird in terms of the way that they're shaped on the end. This is not a hex head. This has 2 parallel sides, and that's it. And because of the angle and the torque on these, I think it's a good idea that you should always use new hardware whenever you've got torque and angle combination bolts. And these also have a little spline on the end of them too. And so these come nicely packed. And so I knew when I bought this kit, and I know I could have saved a few bucks, I think, if I would have bought it separately and assembled them myself, but I knew I was going to have all the upper bolts. I was going to have everything that I needed. And I didn't have to worry as much about making sure I had every single thing picked out correctly, that I had the top caps, that I had the bushings, that I had all the assembly parts that I needed, you know, even down to, because there's a separate part number for this little plastic ring that goes around that the lower coil. On this design here, you see that's actually open at the top. Maybe that will help it breathe to be able to get water out. The tools that you're going to want to do this project are not nearly as bad as it looks, but it will involve a small collection of tools to be able to get this done. So what you don't see here, let's start off camera first. You're going to need a jack and at least a pair of jack stands. Do not do this with the lift that comes with your car for changing a spare tire. You need a proper jack and jack stands to do this. Other gear, safety glasses, gloves to protect your hands. All right, so now other tools that you're going to want. Ideally, if you have an air compressor and you have an impact wrench, a nice 1/2-inch stubby impact wrench will be your best friend. Now, I know it's kind of trendy to not use pneumatic tools, but the small, compact, stubby nature of this proto gun here is ideally suited for this job to kind of work in and around the wheel well. If you've got that Milwaukee M12 stubby, that may work. I don't own it, so I can't tell you if that will work or not. But this is what I'll be using, that this 1/2-inch proto, I think, punches way above its weight. Next couple tools that you're going to want, your choice of penetrating fluid. I think Freeze Off is actually a fantastic penetrant and probably my favorite. You might have PB Blaster or something else just to help loosen the rusted or corroded or frozen bolts that you may encounter. Just a couple quick sprays of that can save you a lot of pain and suffering along the way. All right, so let's talk about wrenches. You're going to want 3 wrenches. You're going to need an 18mm wrench, a 17mm wrench, and a 15mm wrench. To complement that, you're going to want a 3/8 ratchet. You also may want another small 1/2-inch ratchet of your choice, and a long 1/2-inch ratchet or 1/2-inch breaker bar of sizable length to be able to develop the proper angle that you're going to need on a couple of the fasteners. Which brings me to my next couple tools, is a 3/8 and a 1/2-inch torque wrench. Since we are talking about suspension parts here, we want to make sure that we get proper torque on all of our fasteners that we're going to be installing today. So a 1/2-inch and a 3/8 torque wrench is going to be important. And then you also may want a small pry bar for trying to remove the struts from the knuckle. You also are going to need in terms of sockets, you're going to want a 17mm lug nut socket for removing your wheels. You're going to want an 18mm impact socket. You will also probably want about a 6-inch impact extension to go with that 18mm impact socket, an 18mm chrome socket to use on your other hand tools. And then if you're lucky, and your luck will definitely vary, my odds today of this working for me are going to be minimal, but a 6mm hex socket. You may be able to use this instead of a 17mm wrench, but I would not hold your breath on it. You may be able to use this in installing the new sway bar end links, but odds are this will be pointless. If you already have to get out the 17mm wrench, go ahead and use your 17mm wrench. A couple other tools that I've got sitting out here. A file for filing down your knuckle before you put into the new sway bar. Before you put in the new strut. A punch to help punch out the bolts that you need to get out of the strut mount. You also may want a pair of locking pliers to help remove a couple of brake clips and to be able to reseat your hardware and your lines that are in your wheel well. You also may want a pair of scissors to be able to open the packages that you get, and in case you encounter any zip ties that may be holding your lines in place. If you have a pneumatic or an electric ratchet, that may be handy. I'll likely break this out today. I won't make any guarantees on it. Certainly not necessary, but it may make your life go a little quicker. And finally, see if you got here, a parts tray to keep track of your fasteners. You may want multiple ones of those. If you don't have a parts tray, perhaps you can go into your kitchen and raid a muffin tin. Don't tell your significant other what you're doing with it. If they ask any questions, just tell them you'll clean it up and return it later. Or just buy them a new one. That's probably the better choice. But a muffin tin or a magnetic parts tray will go a long ways for it. And so with that, that's our complement of tools that we're going to use on this. And the final thing that you're going to need is probably about 2 hours of your time, give or take. You may be able to do this a little quicker. It may take you a little bit longer, maybe 2.5 hours, give or take, to be able to complete the job on both sides. So it's about an hour on each side. It'll be a little less than that, but by the time you jack up the car, you bring it down, bring everything to final torque, check your work, about 2 hours is probably a reasonable amount. I'm only going to be showing this on one side, lather, rinse, and repeat what I'm going to show you onto the other side. All right, let's get started and head over to the vehicle and kick this project off. So then after we get the car up on jack stands, the next thing we're going to do is remove the wheels. We're going to start by removing the wheel first. I'm going to start the next step by trying to remove the sway bar link. And so to do that, I've got a jack, maybe you can see it down here underneath the knuckle, right down here, pushing this up just a little bit to try to relieve the tension on the sway bar link. And then depending upon how lucky you are, you may be able to fit a 17mm wrench on the back side of this upper bolt. There are two flats, one opposite the other, and it is just two flats. It's not a hex, there's just two flats. It'd be great if it was a hex, but it's not. And so you have to fish around to see if you can push back the bellows to try to find those two flats with a 17mm wrench. And then once I've got that wrench on there, you may want to spray some penetrating oil on there. And then I'm just going to hit that with an impact gun right quick with an 18mm socket just to speed up the process. There, maybe you can see the two flats that I got the wrench on. That's going to take just a little bit of guesswork to try to find those two flats because you're going to be doing that blind. You saw my nut go flying away. Make sure you track that down. You don't want to drive back over parts that you have removed. And so now we've got the upper part of the sway bar link removed. This is kind of like a ball joint. Just get the wrench off now is the next part. All right, there we go, and we'll tuck that away. So the next thing we got to do is deal with the brake line and the vehicle speed sensor. And so now in this case here, this shock that I'm removing actually is an aftermarket shock that does not include the built-in bracket that our new shocks do. So because of that, we're going to have just a little bit of some different parts coming off than what's going to go back on. There's an extra bracket that came with these shocks here that is not part of the actual kit that's supposed to come with us. And so then also there is a zip tie here holding on the speed sensor here. So just a few little quirks. This is supposed to clip in right here. It wasn't. I know I did that a few years ago whenever I was had to remove that to remove the brakes and pull the calipers out. Whole different story. Not a big deal, but certainly works. But in this case here, we got a clip here on the back side that we've got to remove. And then to do that, I'm going to use a pair of locking pliers. And there's our locking clip that's holding our brake line in place. And then now we can just take our brake line, feed it through, and push it out the side. And then now we've got to be, in this case here, I've got a zip tie I've got to cut. Otherwise, there's two little buttons here you'd press to be able to pop that out. This specific aftermarket shock, which is a SACHS Zox, perhaps, has another little plastic clip on the back side that I'm going to pop the speed sensor out of. That's plastic. That is also part of their improvised system of holding these lines in place. And so now that we got those lines loosened, our next thing we're going to do is to break loose the two bolts here to then be able to remove the wheel off of the spring. Now the next thing I'm going to be doing is trying to lower this down to make sure that there's no tension on the spring. So now what I've done is I have lowered the jack down just a little bit so this is resting on it, but that there is no tension up here on, if you get the finger up here on the camera, up here on the spring. so that we can get to these 2 bolts here. When we get these off, then this will be able to roll forward. Hopefully out of this here, I'm going to hit these bolts with a little bit of penetrating oil. And then now to zip these out, this is a 15 millimeter on the flat here. Now this also only has 2 flats. So you got to find where the 2 flats are, and then it's going to be an 18 millimeter on the other side. So now I'm just going to use the 18, I'm going to hold it like this. You can start with top or bottom, it doesn't matter. Then we use my impact gun and an 18 millimeter socket on the bolt. When the bolt comes off, it may come with a washer. The kit that I had ordered from Saab parts did not include washers, so I'm going to save this washer to put back on and reuse. Now I've got 1 more to go. Be careful with the lines and figure out the right way to fish your tool in there. You may have to move some of the lines around so you don't accidentally damage any of the wiring, because that will make this job a lot more difficult than it otherwise would need to be. And then in this case here, I'm going to fish out the extra plate, which looks like this bracket, which I'm not going to need since the new shocks come with the bracket built into them. And so now the next thing we need to do is to be able to get these bolts out. And so we're going to use a hammer to be able to knock those back. Okay, there's one. If you need help, you can take your 1/2-inch impact adapter off, and I'll use that as another punch. The 1/2-inch end will go right around it, and you see how quickly that knocked it loose. Just a quick little fun tip there with your tools. They're designed for impact. And now we've got both of these bolts here, and this is what is securing the shock in here at the bottom. Now I'm going to take one out but I'm going to leave the other one in because we're going to go up to the top and remove the 14 millimeter screws at the top. But I don't want this floating completely loose down here until I'm ready for it. So now we're going to go up to the top of the vehicle and remove the 3 bolts at the top. And then up top, I'm going to use a 13 millimeter socket and ratchet. You could obviously go a little faster with an air ratchet. After I get it so far, I'm going to use my pneumatic air ratchet just to get these the rest of the way out and save some time. And the pneumatic tool made short work of that. And now with these 3 bolts removed, this should be loose and you should be able to move it around. And it's been held in place below by that 1 bolt that we left in. So now let's go down to the wheel well and then remove this. We're just going to be able to slide this out through the wheel well all in one piece. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and remove that last bolt. You may or may not want to squirt this down with a little bit of penetrating oil just to help make sure that you can knock that loose. It looks like mine's going to come out with no problem. Make sure you do not damage your sensor lines there. And then this assembly just comes right out. And we'll set that aside. During this process, we got to make sure that we have this knuckle down here properly supported. The next thing we need to do is get down to this lower sway bar link right down here. This is going to be that 17 millimeter 2-sided spot to try to find with your wrench, and then we'll try to stick a ratchet on the back side. I'm going to use an impact gun to remove that and zip that off. Because of the close quarters, I'm not sure how well the camera is going to be able to capture that. The first trick, of course, is going to be to try to see if you can get lucky and find where those two flats are with your 17mm wrench. I think I found it there. Now I've got to be able to fit an 18mm socket onto the back side of that. And to deal with clearance, I'm going to stick a 6" extension on the end of my impact gun to be able to zip this off from behind. And then hopefully you were able to see that. And you can see there's the wrench stuck on the two flat sides there. So we zip that off and this comes off in one piece. Make sure you find the nut that came off of it. And then now we're going to start a reassembly in reverse order by starting with the sway bar, with the lower sway bar link. We will not be using air tools to reassemble that, but we will have to get out a torque wrench. So now we've got our new sway bar end link, and if yours has these blue caps on them, go ahead and take them off. That's just for shipping. You don't want to drive with the blue caps on. This is reversible. It doesn't matter which way this is, top or bottom. Obviously, you want to make sure you get the right direction in. And so one other little quirk, with this one being brand new, I can simply take a 7mm hex and fit it into the end. On an old cruddy one, that may not work, but this does have the two flats on either side that a wrench can fit. And so then I'll just go ahead and install it, drop it into the bottom there, and I'll just lay it over it. Then I will begin to hand thread the nut on. When you feel like it's getting snug, go ahead and take it off. Then we're going to switch to our torque wrench. And now to bring that lower bolt to final tightness, we're going to use a torque wrench and we're going to set it to 47 foot-pounds. There we go. Now we can sneak our 17mm wrench off and our torque wrench out from behind. And now that we've got this on, now the next step is to get the strut assembly and begin to dry fit the strut assembly. If there's any other debris or crud on your lower control arm, such as gravel, go ahead and brush that off. And now we're going to take our strut assembly and we're going to orientate it where our mounting plate here for the brake lines points forward, and then the bracket here for the sway bar link goes towards the rear. So now in my right hand, I'm going to have one bolt I can put on top to help hold this up. And then I'm going to use my left arm to try to fish both arms in here together, fish this up. Move this around, pay attention to the line. Then I'm going to use one of these bolts up top, just to help to hold this loosely in position. We don't need much, we just need a loose bolt or two. One's good enough because we're going to need to be able to roll this back and try to line this up. If you see the debris here on the buildup here on the side of the control arm, let's take a file here, and then we're going to just lightly file some of that corrosion off, so we try to get a nice smooth surface. Otherwise the fit may be a little more snug than what you're planning. Just a light filing will do. And repeat the same on the other side. Hopefully that's enough. And now we're going to try to gently guide these parts together. This can be a bit of a twisting act. We got to pay attention to our lines coming off and the orientation of our wheel to try to get all of this to come together This may take a little bit of finagling. In my opinion, this is the most difficult part of the process of trying to get the right height and the right alignment. But this is also where it's important to be able to have that file. You know, in this case here, I can tell I need to lower my jack just a touch to try and get these parts to mate. If you're having troubles with the right alignment, a little bit of persuasion. And then a little bit of back and forth with the jack to help to get you to the right angle and the right height with everything coming together. Just make sure you protect your lines. And when you get it close, we're going to take one of our bolts. Notice the splines around the top here. We're going to feed this in from the back. And this will help line it up, make sure that where a 15 millimeter can go. And just because you got one doesn't mean the other one's going to go in necessarily. It may have to go in or out a little bit. Make sure you think about where that 15 millimeter wrench is going to line up and that you've got clearance for that 15 millimeter. If I just play with the 15 millimeter like that, it will help to give me an idea. There we go. Now when I removed these had washers on them. And our kit from Saab Parts did not come with washers. I'm going to put the washers back on at this point. And then I'm going to go ahead and start these nuts by hand. Eventually, we're going to have to tighten these down with torque plus angle. And for suspension bolts like this, you do not want to be reusing your old hardware. Just because it looks okay, the amount of stress that's on these bolts is quite a bit. And so for the cost of the bolts, there's no reason not to just go ahead and buy new bolts. Now I know what you're probably going to say is that it's hard to find the right kind of bolts. But if you own a Saab and you're watching this video, chances are you know where to be able to source parts from. Now I'm just going to use a small 1/2-inch ratchet and an 18 millimeter socket to go ahead and just try to get this bolt here started and get it all the way down before I get out the torque wrench to bring this down to final torque. And now the next step is going to be able to set your torque wrench to 59 foot-pounds to bring this to final torque, which is not going to be our last step because we'll have to bring this then eventually to final angle. There we go. There's the top. All right, now we've got it to torque, but now we've got to get 135 degrees on there. And so the trick that I'm going to do is I think about 135 degrees as being 90 plus 45. So the trick I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Milwaukee Inksol marker. And I'm going to make a mark on these basically about 9 o'clock at the bolt if you're looking at the back. So if we bring that mark all the way up to the top will be 90. And then 45 degrees towards us will then be the last of that 135. So we're just going to go over here to about 9 o'clock on the bolt. And we're going to place a mark there on the top and on the bottom. And so now I'm going to get out a long 1/2-inch ratchet. Then I'm going to start by trying to get that mark all the way up to 12 o'clock. So that'll be 90 degrees. Maybe you can see the black mark there on my bolt from the side. So now I need to go down about another 45 degrees. So right about there. And then we're going to repeat here on the bottom. And then now there's a black mark. Let's see if I can go a little bit closer here with the camera there. And so now that bolt should be at about 130, if you will, if that's a clock. And then now we've got the lower part done. Now we're gonna go up top and put on the rest of our 3 bolts up top. So then I had started by putting this one bolt in first, just to help hold it up. Then I've come back and I've started the other 2 by hand. I'm just gonna continue to tighten these down with the ratchet. This is gonna kind of slide a little bit here as it tries to take its position. You're gonna wanna work these bolts kind of evenly around so it tries to get itself centered within the seat up here for the top of the strut. So don't tighten one bolt. You wanna work your way around. So you kind of tighten them incrementally all the way around as you go. All right, then we're gonna switch over to a torque wrench to make sure we get those at 14 foot-pounds. And now our top of our strut mount is now fully torqued. And now the next step here is we need to be able to get the top of our sway bar end link into the top of the strut mount here. And so if you look at this, you can see maybe if I'm lucky I can get this in, which I am, but if I wasn't quite so lucky, what I would need to do is use my jack to push up the knuckle from below. And then now I'm going to take my bolt, and this has those same 2 flats with the 17 millimeter. If you can find it, I'm just going to hand tighten that on, and this is going to have to get tightened to 47 foot-pounds. And we'll dig up the 17 millimeter wrench. There we go. There's our 17 millimeter wrench. And then I'm just going to use a different ratchet here just to be able to get this quickly down before I get out the torque wrench. All right, now we're close. Now we need to use our torque wrench. Now I've got the torque wrench set to 47 foot-pounds. I'm having to add about a 6-inch extension here just to be able to clear my brake, so I can just get a click or 2 off the ratchet mechanism here. There we go. That means our sway bar end link is now in proper torque. And we got to remove our 17 millimeter wrench here. And then now our final step is going to be able to deal with these lines. So we've got our vehicle speed sensor line, which is this one here. And depending upon how lucky you are on these parts will affect how all this will go together based on how all this was ran. So in my case here, I'm going to deal with the brake line first. If you look at the brake hose, there's a little bit of a D shape to it, and this bracket has a D shape, and there's a little bit of a ridge on top and a ridge on the bottom. That needs to go through this opening here and then slide back, and then we'll put that clip around it here. Be gentle when working with your brake line. You don't want to damage it for hopefully obvious reasons. You don't want to turn this repair into another repair. And then in theory, this ring should just be able to go feed the brake line in through here and then be able to drop it down and pop it up. I'm going to get out my locking pliers to kind of manipulate the bottom of this bracket here to hopefully be able to get that to seat better. There we go. And then there was a clip that you're going to want to put the clip on the back side here to be able to help hold this in place. You may need to get out the hammer again. Make sure that is going in the back side of that bracket. So now that's a nice firm fit there. Then now we got to deal with our vehicle speed sensor cable. And so with this here, we've got some options. And mine has a rubber grommet. That then seats just like that into that clip there. Now remember, as this moves or turns, because of our sway bar end links and the way that our front knuckle here is attached to our strut, these lines and this distance will remain fixed regardless of speed, regardless of position. And so this should hold it in place here. And again, this spot right here won't move relative to each other because all that movement's taking place up there in the spring. And now after we've got our lines correctly tucked away, we make sure that there's nothing rubbing on the back here, that everything is good and clean the way that we want it. Then we'll go ahead and mount our wheel back on the vehicle. All right, now once I've got the wheel reasonably tight, I'm going to go ahead and lower the car back on the ground so I can put my torque wrench on here and bring all these bolts up to 80 foot-pounds. Now with the vehicle on the ground, I got the weight of the vehicle to help me bring these wheels to final torque at 80 foot-pounds. Then after you've repeated that process on both sides, the final step will be to go ahead and close the hood. Check out your beautiful Saab emblem, take it on a test drive to verify your repair and check your ride. Make sure you can turn left, turn right. You got your brakes, you got everything you can do, and hopefully everything turns out well for you. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video, found it useful, give it a thumbs up. I've got a whole playlist of additional Saab repairs if you're interested in that for a Saab 9.3. This video will be part of that playlist, which I'll also put a link to below. Check it out. Click subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Bye.